He was a titan of industry, a man who could move markets with a whisper. But the one person he failed to see was the woman sleeping beside him. To billionaire Alistair Hawthorne, his wife Madeline was just another beautiful acquisition, a quiet and graceful ornament for his lavish life. He ignored her ideas, dismissed her passions, and paraded his indiscretions in front of her confident. She was too timid to ever challenge him. But he never thought to ask about the secrets she kept locked behind her gentle smile. Tonight, at his spectacular annual charity gala, in a room filled with the world's most powerful people, he's about to learn that the shadow he cast for years was the perfect place for his wife to build an empire of her own. The silence in the Hawthorne penthouse was a specific kind of loud. It was the sound of unspoken disappointments, of conversations that died before they began, and of the vast, marble-floored distance between two people sharing a life, but not a connection. Madeline Beaumont. For 5 years, Mrs. Alistair Hawthorne knew its every nuance. She could trace its echoes from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city to the cold, minimalist art Alistair had chosen for the walls. The art, like everything else, was an investment chosen for its projected value, not for the soul it might possess. Madeline was in many ways just another piece in his collection. He had pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate acquisition. She was an art history graduate working at a small, respected gallery. He'd found her intelligence and gentle nature a charming novelty, a respite from the sharp-edged, ambitious women who typically vied for his attention. He'd called her his serene sanctuary. But sanctuaries, by their nature, are meant to be quiet, to be still. And for 5 years, Madeline had been just that. Her days were a meticulously scheduled rotation of charity luncheons, board meetings for foundations where her only role was to smile and nod, and fittings with designers who dressed her in the image Alistair preferred, elegant, understated, and utterly safe. Her opinions, once the very thing he'd claimed to admire, were now treated as mild interruptions. "I was thinking for the Hawthorne Foundation Gala this year," she began one evening over a dinner they rarely shared. "Alone we could highlight emerging artists. We could dedicate a wing to showcasing their work, give them a platform. It would align with my background and bring a fresh energy to the event." Alistair didn't look up from the financial report on his tablet. "The gala is for our established donors, Madeline. They want to see Warhols and Rothkos on the auction block, not canvases from some unknown kid in a warehouse. It's about prestige, not energy." He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture so casual it was almost crueler than a direct insult. He wasn't arguing. He was correcting a child's naive suggestion. The conversation, as it always did, evaporated. His neglect wasn't always passive. It had a sharper, more public edge in the form of Bianca Valenti. A sleek, raven-haired socialite with a viper's smile, Bianca was everything Madeline was not: loud, ostentatious, and unapologetically transactional. She was the vice president of marketing at Hawthorne Industries, a position Alistair had created for her. It was a poorly kept secret that their professional relationship extended far beyond the boardroom. Alistair would laugh at Bianca's cutting jokes at dinner parties, jokes often subtly aimed at Madeline's quaint interests. He'd place his hand on the small of Bianca's back, a gesture of casual ownership that sent a ripple of knowing glances through their social circle. He did it all under the guise of professional familiarity, but everyone saw it for what it was: a humiliation. Madeline endured it with a quiet grace that was frequently mistaken for weakness. She would offer a tight, polite smile, her posture perfect, her composure a shield. But behind her calm blue eyes A ledger was being kept. Every dismissive word, every condescending glance, every moment, she was made to feel like a ghost in her own life, was recorded in meticulous detail. The upcoming Hawthorne Foundation. Gala was the pinnacle of their social calendar, and this year the tension was thicker than ever. It was the one night Alistair needed her to play the part of the perfect adoring wife flawlessly. The event was securing a massive merger, and image was everything. "Darling," he'd said, finally looking at her a week before the event, his eyes scanning her as if assessing a stock price. "Make sure you wear the sapphire necklace. It projects stability." He wasn't asking her to look beautiful for him or for them. He was instructing her on how to be a better asset. That afternoon, Madeline was in her private study, a small sunlit room Alistair rarely entered. It was the only space that felt truly hers, filled with books on art history, and more recently, economics and corporate law. She was on a secure video call. Her expression transformed. The soft, placid mask she wore in public was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, focused intelligence. On the screen was a kind-faced older man in a conservative suit. The final block of shares was acquired this morning. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Mr. Peterson said, his voice calm and steady. "The portfolio is diversified, and the holding company is completely insulated as of 8:15 a.m. You are officially the majority stakeholder." Madeline felt a tremor, not of fear, but of power run through her. "And there is no paper trail leading back to me." "None whatsoever," he confirmed. "The Orion Investment Group is as anonymous as a ghost. To the world, it's just another aggressive, faceless fund that saw an opportunity. No one knows it's run by a woman they believe spends her days planning flower arrangements." She allowed herself a small, cold smile. For months, this had been her real life. The lonely nights Alistair was working late with Bianca were her study sessions. The charity luncheons were her cover for discreet meetings. The endless hours she spent alone in the silent penthouse were filled with the thrill of a secret war, a campaign waged in stealth. Alistair thought she was a piece in his collection. He was about to find out she was the collector. And she was coming for the one thing he valued more than anything in the world, his unshakable control. The gala was in 3 days. The stage was set. The catalyst, the single moment that fractured Madeline's quiet endurance and set her on a new path, hadn't been a grand cinematic betrayal. It was a small, slicing remark, delivered with casual cruelty, that finally broke the spell of her passivity. It happened 2 months before her secret acquisitions began. Alistair was hosting an intimate dinner for a potential business partner, a gruff old-money industrialist named Robert Vance. Madeline had carefully planned the menu, overseen the decor, and researched Vance's interests, hoping to contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way. Throughout the evening, Alistair steered the conversation exclusively to finance mergers and market projections fields in which Madeline was presumed to be an illiterate bystander. When Vance, trying to be polite, turned to her and asked about her work at the art gallery. Before her marriage, Madeline's face lit up. "I was a curator for contemporary sculpture," she began, her voice filled with a warmth that had been absent for years. "My focus was on postmodernist artists who work with reclaimed materials. There's a fascinating movement that explores the intersection of sustainability and—" Alistair cut her off with a booming, indulgent laugh. "Madeline, please. Don't bore Robert with your little hobbies." He turned to Vance, a conspiratorial smirk on his face. "She has a good heart, but her passions are—" quaint. I married her for her taste, not her portfolio analysis. The table fell silent. The air crackled with Madeline's humiliation. It wasn't just that he had dismissed her. He had framed her life's passion as a trivial, childish pastime in front of a stranger. He had reduced her entire identity to that of a decorative object he had acquired. In that moment, watching him laugh with Vance, she saw her marriage for what it truly was: a gilded cage where the bars were made of his condescension. She excused herself from the table with practiced poise, her back straight, her head held high. But once in the solitude of her study, the facade crumbled. The quiet sadness she had lived with for years curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger. It wasn't just about Alistair and Bianca anymore. It was about the slow, systematic erasure of her own self. The next day, she began to dig. She started with her own finances, a subject Alistair had always handled. He'd set up a generous allowance for her, an amount designed to keep her comfortable and incurious. But Madeline wasn't interested in the allowance. She was looking for something else, a loose thread from her past. She found it in a dusty box of documents from her grandmother's estate. Her grandmother, a woman Alistair had dismissed as a simple schoolteacher, had been a quiet, shrewd investor her whole life. Tucked away in a forgotten trust, untouched and accumulating value for over a decade, was an inheritance. It wasn't billionaire wealth, but it was substantial, far more than Alistair could ever imagine a simple schoolteacher possessing. It was a secret nest egg left to her, with a handwritten note: "For a day when you decide to build a world of your own." That day had arrived. Her grandmother's lawyer had long since retired, but his firm was still active. With trembling hands, Madeline made a call and was referred to the firm's most discreet senior wealth manager, a man named Arthur Peterson. When they met in a quiet, anonymous office downtown, Mr. Peterson was exactly what she had hoped for: old school, impeccably professional, and with eyes that seemed to understand everything without her having to say a word. He reviewed the portfolio her grandmother had left her. "Your grandmother was a very wise woman, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, looking at her over his spectacles. "She invested in foundational tech and biotech long before they were fashionable. This portfolio is not just solid, it's a launch pad." Madeline took a deep breath. "Mr. Peterson, I am not looking to fund a shopping habit or a new charity. I'm looking to make a strategic acquisition. I want to build something, but it must be done in absolute secrecy. My husband cannot know. No one can." Mr. Peterson didn't flinch. He simply nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. He had seen enough of the world of powerful men and their often overlooked wives to grasp the situation immediately. "Secrecy is a service we provide. Mrs. Hawthorne, tell me, what is the target?" This was the moment. This was where the vague sense of rebellion solidified into a concrete plan. She thought about Alistair's world, his obsessions, his vulnerabilities. His latest fixation was the hostile takeover of a mid-sized, innovative green energy company, Helios Innovations. Alistair wanted to acquire it, strip its valuable patents for his own tech division, and shutter the rest. It was a ruthless, predatory move, typical of his business style. But Madeline knew something Alistair didn't. Her father, an engineering professor who had passed away years ago, had been a mentor to the founder of Helios. She knew the company wasn't just a collection of patents. It was a team of brilliant people dedicated to a cause. Gutting it would be an act of corporate vandalism. "Helios Innovations," Madeline said, her voice steady and clear. "I want to buy a controlling interest before my husband can, and then I want to use that position to invest in them to make them untouchable." Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. This wasn't just a spiteful whim. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered strategy. It was both a defensive move to protect a legacy she cared about and a direct offensive strike at the heart of Alistair's current ambition. "That is a very ambitious play, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said slowly. "Hawthorne Industries has formidable resources. But they are loud about it." Madeline countered, a new confidence sparking within her. "They move like a predator, and everyone can see them coming. We will move like a ghost. We will use a holding company, an anonymous entity. We will buy small, untraceable blocks of shares through various brokers. He won't see us until it's too late." For the first time in years, Madeline felt the thrill of her own intellect, the power of her own agency. She was no longer a quaint hobbyist. She was a strategist. The seed of rebellion had taken root, and it was growing into an oak tree of formidable strength, right in the shadow of the man who thought her nothing more than a delicate flower. For the next 6 months, Madeline Hawthorne lived a meticulously crafted double life. To Alistair and their glittering social circle, she remained the serene, almost invisible wife. She attended her luncheons, smiled placidly at board meetings, and nodded along as Alistair pontificated about his business triumphs. Her placid exterior was the perfect camouflage. No one looks for a shark in a koi pond. But the moment she was alone in her study, the transformation was absolute. The room became her war room. The art history books were joined by texts on securities law, market analysis, and corporate governance. Her laptop, once used for emailing caterers, now glowed with encrypted messaging apps and real-time stock tickers. Her partnership with Mr. Peterson was a masterclass in discretion. They never met in person again. Their communication was a complex dance of burner phones, secure video conferences and messages passed through a trusted courier who believed he was delivering rare art auction catalogues. Mr. Peterson, energized by a challenge he hadn't experienced in years, became her tutor and field marshal. "Alistair's strategy is a frontal assault," he explained during one of their late-night calls as Madeline sat in her silk dressing gown studying spreadsheets. "He's driving down the stock price, with negative press likely leaked by his own people to make the acquisition cheaper. He thinks he's the only player at the table." "Then we won't sit at the table," Madeline replied, her voice low and steady. "We'll buy the chairs from under him." Her plan was brilliant in its subtlety. Through the Shell Corporation, they'd created the Orion Investment Group they began to buy. They didn't purchase large, attention-grabbing blocks of Helios stock. Instead, they executed hundreds of small purchases through a dozen different brokerage firms, always staying just below the percentage that would trigger a mandatory SEC disclosure. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. Madeline learned to read the market's rhythms to anticipate Alistair's moves. She discovered she had a natural, intuitive grasp of strategy, a skill honed by years of navigating the complex and treacherous social politics of Alistair's world. She knew how to be patient, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. One afternoon, Bianca sauntered into the penthouse, ostensibly to drop off some files for Alistair. She found Madeline in the living room, sketching in a notebook. "Still drawing your little flowers?" Madeline Bianca purred, glancing at the page with a condescending smirk. "How lovely. Alistair is closing the biggest deal of his career, and you're doodling." Madeline looked up, her expression unreadable. The drawing wasn't of flowers. It was a complex flow chart, a map of shell corporations and holding patterns disguised with petals and leaves. "Everyone needs a creative outlet, Bianca," she said softly. The ignorance of her rivals was her greatest weapon. They saw a quiet, artistic woman and couldn't imagine the mind of a predator lurking beneath. The stress was immense, but it was a different kind of stress from the soul-crushing weight of her marriage. This was the sharp, exhilarating stress of high stakes of purpose. Some nights she would barely sleep, her mind racing with numbers and strategies. She would watch Alistair sleeping beside her, this powerful man, so completely oblivious to the storm she was gathering around him, and feel a cold, clear sense of purpose. He had underestimated her. It would be his undoing. The final piece of her plan was about Helios itself. Using an alias, she opened a back channel of communication with Helios's CEO, a brilliant but beleaguered scientist named Dr. Eris Thorne. She introduced herself as a representative of a private investment group that believed in his vision and wanted to help him fight off the hostile takeover. "Hawthorne doesn't want your technology," she wrote in an encrypted email. "He wants your patents. He will gut your research department and fire your team. We want to fund it. We want to see you grow." Thorne, initially skeptical, was desperate. He saw a lifeline. Madeline, through Orion, provided him with enough capital to shore up his company's immediate finances, a move that slightly boosted the stock price and made Alistair's acquisition efforts more expensive and frustrating. Alistair, furious at this mysterious interference, simply doubled down on his aggressive tactics, making him even more predictable. He was playing checkers, convinced he was a king. Madeline was playing chess, and she was already 3 moves from checkmate. A week before the gala, Mr. Peterson confirmed the final transaction. "It's done, Mrs. Hawthorne. Orion Investment Group now controls 52% of Helios Innovations. You are the silent majority owner. The company is yours." Madeline closed her eyes, letting the reality of her victory wash over her. She had done it. She had secretly moved millions of dollars, outmaneuvered one of the most ruthless billionaires in the country, and saved a company she believed in. Now only the final act remained. It was time to step out of the shadows. She opened her closet, pushing past the muted, elegant dresses Alistair preferred. In the very back, preserved in a garment bag, was a dress she had bought herself years ago but had never dared to wear. It was a bold, stunning creation of deep crimson silk that shimmered like liquid fire. It was not the dress of a serene sanctuary. It was the dress of a queen. The day of the Hawthorne Foundation gala arrived with a palpable sense of electricity. For Alistair, it was the culmination of months of work, the night he would unofficially celebrate his impending conquest of Helios Innovations in front of the world that mattered. For Madeline, it was the day the world would be redrawn. The penthouse was a flurry of activity. Stylists, caterers, and assistants buzzed in and out, their movements orchestrated by Alistair's imperious commands. He stood in the center of it all, a king surveying his court, barking orders into his phone. He was so consumed by the evening's performance that he barely registered his wife's presence. Madeline moved through the chaos with a preternatural calm. She approved the final floral arrangements, confirmed the seating chart, and handled a last-minute crisis with the orchestra, all with the quiet efficiency he had long taken for granted. This was her role, the silent, competent manager of his domestic and social life. Tonight, she would play it to perfection one last time. An hour before they were due to leave, Alistair strode into their master suite. Madeline was sitting at her vanity, her hair already styled in an elegant but severe chignon. He was already in his tuxedo, looking sharp, powerful, and utterly self-absorbed. "Is everything handled?" he asked, not as a question, but as a demand for confirmation. He adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, his eyes on his own reflection. "Everything is in order," Madeline replied, her voice even. He finally glanced at her, or rather at the space she occupied. "Good. Don't forget the sapphires. We need to project an image of unbreakable strength tonight. This merger is as good as done, but appearances are crucial." He saw the sapphire box on her vanity and nodded in satisfaction. He didn't notice the empty space beside it, where the crimson dress she planned to wear should have been hanging. He didn't notice the new steely resolve in her eyes. He didn't see her at all. He only saw a component of his grand design. "I have to get to the venue early," he announced, checking his watch. "Need to glad hand some board members before the chaos begins. The driver will be back for you in 30 minutes. Don't be late." He leaned down, not for a kiss, but to give her a dry, perfunctory peck on the cheek. It felt like a corporate seal of approval. "Break a leg, darling," he murmured, the irony lost on him. Then he was gone, his brisk footsteps echoing down the marble hallway, leaving behind the familiar ringing silence. The moment the door clicked shut, Madeline's entire demeanor shifted. The stillness broke, replaced by a swift, deliberate purpose. She walked to her closet and took out the crimson dress. It was a statement piece, a work of art designed to be seen, not overlooked. It was a declaration. As she stepped into the silk, she felt as if she were shedding a skin she had worn for 5 long years. The demure, understated Mrs. Hawthorne was disappearing, and the real Madeline Beaumont was re-emerging stronger, sharper, and forged in the fires of her husband's neglect. She bypassed the sapphire necklace, the symbol of the stability he wanted to project. Instead, she chose a single, stunning piece of jewelry. Her grandmother had left her a diamond necklace designed like a serpent, its eyes tiny emeralds. It was bold, a little dangerous, and entirely her own. When she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was a stranger, but a welcome one. The severe chignon was gone. Her hair now styled in soft, confident waves that framed a face that was no longer placid, but alive with intelligence and intent. The crimson dress hugged her form, a stark contrast to the muted greys and navies that had become her uniform. This was not the woman Alistair expected to walk into his party. This was not the asset he had instructed to wear sapphires. Her phone buzzed. It was a secure message from Mr. Peterson. "The market is closed. All is quiet. The stage is yours, Mrs. Hawthorne. Or should I say, Ms. Beaumont." She smiled. The name felt right. Madeline Beaumont was back. The driver Alistair had sent was waiting downstairs. As she descended in the private elevator, the mirrored walls reflected a queen in red. The nervousness she had expected to feel was absent, replaced by a full, thrilling certainty. Alistair had told her not to be late, but Madeline had no intention of arriving on his schedule. A queen is never late. Everyone else is simply early. She instructed the driver to take a scenic route along the river, a deliberate delay. Her entrance had to be perfectly timed. She wouldn't arrive in Alistair's shadow. She would arrive when the party was in full swing, when all eyes were on her husband, the master of the universe. Only then would she walk in and steal the show. The grand ballroom of the Metropole Hotel was a universe of power and wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the discreet murmur of billion-dollar deals and influential gossip. At the center of this universe stood Alistair Hawthorne, radiating success. He was holding court near the grand staircase, a glass of champagne in one hand, Bianca Valenti, clad in a glittering silver dress, artfully positioned at his side. He had just glanced at his watch for the third time, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Madeline was late. It was unprofessional. He needed her here, playing her part. And then a hush fell over the entrance of the ballroom. It started as a ripple, a few heads turning, and quickly grew into a wave of stunned silence that washed across the entire room. The conversations faltered. The music seemed to fade into the background. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, was a woman in a breathtaking crimson gown. For a moment, no one recognized her. This woman was a vision of power and confidence. Her head was held high, her gaze sweeping across the room with an unnerving self-possession. The serpent necklace at her throat caught the light, its emerald eyes seeming to glitter with a life of their own. It was Madeline. Alistair froze the champagne glass, momentarily forgotten in his hand. He stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the demure, quiet woman he had left at home with the spectacular creature commanding the attention of every person in the room. It was as if she had been recast in a different role without his permission. The dress, the hair, the look in her eyes, it was all wrong. It was all a defiant, glorious rebellion. Bianca's perfectly curated smile tightened her eyes, narrowing with instant venomous jealousy. This was not the woman she had so easily dismissed for years. This was a rival. As Madeline descended the staircase, the silence broke into a flurry of whispers. "Is that Madeline Hawthorne? I've never seen her look like that. My God, what is she wearing?" The whispers were not of mockery, but of awe and confusion. She moved not with the timid deference Alistair expected, but with a fluid, deliberate grace. She didn't make her way toward her husband. Instead, she veered to the side, where a small group of the most powerful people in the room were gathered. Robert Vance, the industrialist Alistair had been so keen to impress, a tech mogul named Kenji Tanaka, and the formidable head of the National Banking Commission. Alistair watched his confusion turning to anger as they greeted her not with the polite condescension usually reserved for corporate wives, but with genuine warmth and respect. Tanaka leaned in to kiss her cheek. Vance, the man before whom Alistair had humiliated her, actually bowed his head slightly. "Madeline, you look magnificent," Vance said, his voice booming with admiration. "Aris Thorne speaks very highly of you." Madeline gave him a radiant smile. "Aris is a visionary. It's a privilege to be his partner." The words, spoken just loudly enough to be overheard by those nearby, sent another shockwave through the crowd. Partner Alistair started to move toward her, his face a thunderous mask, but he was intercepted by a senator. He was trapped, forced to smile and shake hands while watching his wife, his quiet, decorative wife, hold court with the very people he spent his life trying to impress. She was talking business. She was laughing. She looked more alive than he had ever seen her. Madeline could feel Alistair's gaze burning into her back, but she ignored it. For the first time, she was not an extension of him. She was the center of her own gravity, and she was pulling the most important people in the room into her orbit. She was no longer a ghost in his machine. She had become a machine of her own. Finally, she turned, and her eyes met Alistair's across the crowded room. She held his gaze, and for the first time there was no fear, no deference, no quiet apology in her eyes. There was only the cool, calm assessment of an equal, or perhaps a superior. She gave him a small, enigmatic smile that didn't reach her eyes. A smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming." Then she turned back to her conversation, dismissing him as easily as he had dismissed her for 5 years. The grand entrance was over. It had been a stunning success, but it was only the overture. The main performance was yet to come. The highlight of the Hawthorne Foundation Gala was the live auction, a spectacle of performative philanthropy, where Alistair would take the stage to rally donations and, more importantly, cement his status as the industry's benevolent king. Tonight he took the microphone with an extra dose of swagger, a desperate attempt to reclaim the spotlight his wife had so unexpectedly stolen. He was charming, witty, and powerful. He spoke of legacy, of ambition, of the future his company was building. He was in his element, the master of his universe, and the room was once again under his spell. Madeline watched from a table near the front, her expression perfectly composed. She sat not with the other corporate wives, but between Kenji Tanaka and Robert Vance, a clear statement of her new allegiance. And now Alistair announced, his voice booming, "We come to our final, most exciting announcement of the evening. As many of you know, Hawthorne Industries is dedicated to progress, and as part of that commitment, we are in the final stages of acquiring Helios Innovations, a company with remarkable potential that we intend to fully integrate into our tech division to create unparalleled synergy." A polite knowing applause rippled through the room. It was the public declaration of his victory. He was putting a flag in the ground. He looked directly at Madeline, a triumphant, challenging glint in his eye, as if to say, "This is my world. This is real power." He then motioned to the gala's host, a well-known journalist. "And to speak more on the future of innovation, I'd like to invite our host back to the stage." The journalist smiled warmly. "Thank you, Alistair. Truly a remarkable vision." He paused, looking down at a card in his hand, with a slightly puzzled expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been handed an update that appears to be a significant development in that very story. It seems there is another major player in the Helios Innovations deal." A confused murmur spread through the ballroom. Alistair's confident smile faltered. This was not on the program. The host continued, "Helios's board of directors has just released an official statement, effective immediately. They have accepted a partnership and funding agreement from a private investment group that has, over the last 6 months, quietly acquired a 52% controlling stake in the company." The air was sucked out of the room. A controlling stake, that was impossible. Alistair's team had been monitoring every major transaction. This investment, the host read. His voice, filled with drama, will ensure Helios remains an independent entity dedicated to its core mission of sustainable energy. The hostile takeover bid from Hawthorne Industries has been officially rejected. Alistair turned pale. His face, broadcast on the giant screens on either side of the stage, was a mask of disbelief and fury. He had been publicly humiliatingly outmaneuvered. The statement concludes, the host said, looking up at the stunned crowd, by announcing that the new majority shareholder will be taking a public role as the strategic director of the board. The name of the investment group is the Orion Investment Group. He paused for effect. And its principal owner and director is here with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Madeline Beaumont. Checkmate. For a moment there was absolute deafening silence. The collective gasp was felt rather than heard. Alistair looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his eyes locking on his wife. Madeline Beaumont. Not Hawthorne. Beaumont. With unhurried grace, Madeline stood up. The crimson of her dress seemed to burn in the spotlights. She gave a small, polite nod to Tanaka and Vance and walked toward the stage. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, each step a hammer blow to Alistair's ego. She took the microphone from the stunned host. She looked out at the sea of shocked faces, her gaze calm and commanding. And then she looked directly at her husband, who was still standing frozen on the stage just a few feet away. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent hall. "I have always believed that true progress is not about consumption, but about creation. It's not about acquiring and dismantling, but about building and nurturing. Helios Innovations represents a future, I believe, in a legacy of sustainable technology that my late father, a brilliant engineer himself, would have been proud of. My investment group and I are committed to providing Dr. Thorne and his team with everything they need to change the world." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word was delivered with the precise, devastating force of a wrecking ball. She had not only beaten him, but she had also claimed the moral high ground, tying her victory to her family's legacy and a noble cause. She had exposed his predatory tactics as a thing of the past. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the future," she concluded. She gave a final dazzling smile to the audience, turned, and walked off the stage, leaving her husband standing alone in the ruins of his triumph, utterly and completely defeated in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress. The ride back to the penthouse was a study in suffocating silence. Alistair sat rigid on one side of the limousine, his face a granite mask of fury. Madeline sat opposite him, serene and composed, watching the city lights blur past as if it were just another evening. The air between them was thick with unspoken accusations and shattered pride. The moment the penthouse door closed behind them, the fragile truce of silence shattered. "What have you done?" Alistair's voice was a low, dangerous snarl. He tore off his bow tie, his movements jerky with rage. What in God's name was that? Madeline calmly slipped off her heels, placing them neatly by the door. She turned to face him, her expression unyielding. "I believe the announcement was quite clear. I saved a company from a predator." "Saved it," he roared, taking a step toward her. "You humiliated me. You went behind my back, conspired against me, and made me a laughingstock in my own ballroom, on my own stage." "Your stage," Madeline countered, her voice dangerously soft. "Was that the same stage where you planned to announce the destruction of a company my father believed in? Or was it the one you shared with your mistress, while your wife was expected to applaud from the audience? You seem to be confused about who owns what, Alistair." The mention of Bianca and her father struck him silent for a second, his rage momentarily short-circuited by the directness of her attack. He had never heard her speak this way. The deference was gone, replaced by a blade of cold steel. "Where did you get the money?" he demanded, his mind racing, trying to piece together the impossible. "I control our finances. You couldn't buy a new car without me knowing about it." "That's where you're wrong," she said, walking toward the windows overlooking the city. "You controlled your finances. You never once bothered to ask about mine. You saw a schoolteacher's daughter and assumed she came with nothing. You never thought to look deeper." She told him then about her grandmother's inheritance, the secret portfolio that had been growing in silence for years. She explained how every time he had dismissed her, ignored her, or humiliated her, it had fueled her resolve. "You saw a hobbyist," she said, her voice laced with the ice of 5 years of repressed anger. "You saw a decorative, quaint little wife. You never ever saw me. You were so blinded by your own arrogance, you couldn't see the person sleeping next to you. That was your biggest mistake." Alistair stared at her. the pieces finally clicking into place. The late nights she was reading the art catalogues that were delivered her sudden interest in the financial news. It had all been happening right under his nose. The sheer scale of her deception, her strategic brilliance, was both terrifying and, on some deep, unrecognized level, astounding. His fury began to curdle into a different, more complex emotion, a grudging, horrified respect. He had been beaten not by a corporate rival, but by his wife, the woman he thought he owned. So this was all for revenge? He asked, his voice quieter now. To destroy me for sleeping with Bianca Madeline let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Oh, Alistair, you still think the world revolves around you. Bianca was a symptom, not the disease. Your affairs were just another example of your profound disrespect. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a fleeting emotional act. This was a strategic realignment. You were a bad investment, so I divested. She turned to face him fully, her eyes clear and resolute. I have no interest in destroying you, but I will not stand by and watch you destroy good people and good ideas for profit. Helios Innovations is now under my protection. You will not touch it. You will issue a public statement tomorrow morning withdrawing your bid and wishing the new leadership well. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The power dynamic in the room, in their entire world, had irrevocably shifted. He was a billionaire, a titan, but she held a controlling interest in the one thing he wanted most. And she had just proven she was a far more cunning player than he was. And us, he finally asked the word, hanging awkwardly in the air. What about us? Madeline looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the woman he had married, a deep sadness in her eyes. There is no us, Alistair. There hasn't been for a very long time. You just built such a large gilded cage that it took me a while to find the door. She walked past him, heading toward the guest wing of the penthouse. I'll have my things moved out by the end of the week. My lawyers will be in touch with yours. I suggest you tell them to be cooperative. He was left standing alone in the vast, silent living room, surrounded by the cold, minimalist art that was supposed to represent his success. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of the word bankrupt. He hadn't just lost a deal. He had lost the one person who had been holding his world together in a way he had been too blind to ever appreciate. The ghost in his machine had become the master of it, and she had just turned it off. The days that followed the gala were a brutal education for Alistair Hawthorne. The story of his public defeat was the lead item in every financial journal and gossip column. The narrative was intoxicating: the invisible wife, the secret heiress, the brilliant corporate maneuver. Madeline Beaumont was instantly mythologized as a feminist icon, a strategic genius who had emerged from the shadows. Alistair, conversely, was painted as an arrogant fool, outsmarted by the one person he should have known best. His investors were spooked. His board of directors demanded emergency meetings. The illusion of his invincibility, the very foundation of his power, was shattered. Calls were not being returned. Deals that had been all but certain were suddenly put on hold. The world that had once bent to his will now viewed him with a new critical eye. Bianca Valenti was one of the first rats to leave the sinking ship. She saw that Alistair's social and professional currency had plummeted. Within a week, she had quietly resigned from Hawthorne Industries, releasing a statement about pursuing new opportunities. There was no loyalty in her world, only a ruthless calculation of power, and Alistair was no longer the winning bet. Her departure was a footnote in his cascade of losses, but it was a telling one. True to her word, Madeline moved out of the penthouse. She didn't flee in the night. She arranged for professional movers to come during broad daylight, a calm, orderly, and very public dismantling of their life together. She took only her personal belongings, her books, and a single painting from the collection, not one of the famous expensive ones, but a small, serene landscape she had always loved, one Alistair had deemed insignificant. Alistair, meanwhile, found himself adrift in the echoing silence of the massive apartment. Every room was a monument to his failure. He would catch himself listening for her soft footsteps, for the gentle sound of her turning a page in her study. The silence he had once cultivated as a sign of his dominance now felt like a crushing, unbearable void. Stripped of the sycophants and the distractions, he was forced to confront the truth. He replayed the last 5 years in his mind, but this time he saw it through her eyes. He saw her attempts to connect her intelligent suggestions. He'd brushed aside her quiet dignity in the face of his blatant affairs, her profound loneliness. He had mistaken her grace for weakness, her silence for submission. He had not just ignored her. He had actively tried to diminish her to keep her small, so he could feel large. 2 weeks after the gala, humbled and desperate, he did something he hadn't done in years. He asked to see her, not through lawyers, but directly. He sent her a simple handwritten note. They met in a neutral location, a private room at the gallery where she had once worked. When she walked in, he was struck once again by her transformation. She was wearing a simple but impeccably tailored business dress. The quiet uncertainty was gone, replaced by an aura of calm authority. She was no longer Mrs. Hawthorne, the appendage. She was Madeline Beaumont, the principal. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, his voice strained. "Madeline, I am sorry." The apology hung in the air. It was genuine, born of a painful and profound self-realization. "I was a fool," he continued. "I was arrogant and cruel, and I didn't deserve you. I took your light and tried to hide it, because I was afraid it would outshine my own. I see that. Now." Madeline listened, her expression unreadable. She did not offer him the easy comfort of immediate forgiveness. "What do you want, Alistair?" she asked, her tone not unkind, but direct. "I want—" He hesitated. The honest answer was that he wanted her back. He wanted the life he had so carelessly thrown away. But he knew that was impossible. He had broken that beyond repair. So he offered the only thing he had left. "I want to propose a partnership." She raised an eyebrow. "Not a personal one," he clarified quickly. "A professional one. You were right about Helios. My approach was wrong. Your vision is better. You are a better strategist than I am. Hawthorne. Industries is taking a beating. We need a new direction, a new story. A joint venture between Hawthorne and a revitalized Helios. It would be powerful. We could do great things. Together." It was the ultimate concession. He was admitting her superiority and begging for a professional lifeline. He was offering to be her partner on her terms. Madeline considered his proposal for a long moment. The old Madeline would have shrunk from the idea. But she was no longer that woman. She saw the opportunity not to save him, but to leverage his resources for her own goals. With the power of Hawthorne Industries behind Helios, the impact they could make would be magnified tenfold. "I will consider it," she said finally. "I will have my team draw up a preliminary proposal. But Madeline, be very clear on this. I will be the senior partner. The terms will be mine, and my lawyers will oversee every detail. There will be no room for the old ways." Alistair nodded a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him. It was more than he deserved. Whatever you say, the terms will be yours. He left the gallery that day, a different man, humbled, defeated, but with a flicker of hope. Not for a romantic reconciliation, but for a chance to build something new from the ashes of his arrogance, guided by the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. Madeline watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a quiet sense of closure. Her journey hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about finding herself. She had stepped out of his shadow, not just to be seen, but to finally cast a shadow of her own, one that was long powerful and shaped entirely by her own design. That night at the gala was not an ending, but a spectacular beginning. Madeline Beaumont's story became a legend in the business world, a testament to the quiet power that is so often overlooked. She didn't just win a battle against her husband. She redefined her entire existence, transforming from a silent partner in a lonely marriage to a visionary leader in a competitive industry. Her journey teaches us that true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's forged in silence, built in the shadows of neglect, waiting for the perfect moment to step into the light and change the world. She proved that the most valuable asset is not wealth or power, but a sense of self-worth that no one can take from you. What did you think of Madeline's incredible transformation? Have you ever felt underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We love hearing from you. If you were captivated by this story of empowerment and sweet revenge, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.